and with the Trump administration, you're seeing just the real forces of finance that have controlled U.S. governments since the aftermath of World War II. The masters of plunder just rear their heads in ways they haven't before and just take on government positions instead of trying to influence empty suits from behind the scenes. That's Steve Feinberg. It's a collection of billionaires advancing the financial priorities of their predatory industry through policy. And Pete Hegseth, he's just kind of a colorful front man who Trump, I think, believes is somehow charismatic and is way over his head here, way over his head. There was a great exchange, I believe, in Israel with the Ministry of Strategic Affairs, which is one of the fake ministries that Israel has to create because they have to give all of their they have to have so many ministers in order to hold a coalition together. They'll be like, we need the ministry for the Orthodox party. We need ministry for the Mizrahi party, Shas. We need the ministry for the religious nationalist party. We need a ministry for the very fascist religious nationalist party. And we need a ministry for the very, very, very fascist religious nationalist party. So they can all have different ministers. And then this will allow us to make Netanyahu king forever. That's how Netanyahu's people do it. So they made up the Ministry of Strategic Affairs. I think it was so like Avigdor Lieberman could be a minister because they needed the Russian vote. So they have this other fake ministry, which now has a spokeswoman. And they had a press conference, and RT dared to ask about the forbidden issue, which our friend Sam Husseini has been basically blacklisted for in the Trump State Department briefing room: Israel's secret nuclear weapons program, its strategic ambiguity, which exempts it from IAEA inspections at the Dimona facility, where it has at least 250 nuclear warheads and has not just the Middle East, but Europe in its crosshairs through the Samson option, which Seymour Hersh revealed in the 1970s. So watch this exchange. This is wild.
Iran cannot have nuclear weapon, and this is what's in front of us. We understand it's not just a threat to Israel, but to the entire world.
What about Israel?
Israel is not posing a threat to anyone. We don't have any ambitions.
Sorry, my whole bit was wrong because this is the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but they do have a Ministry of Strategic Affairs and a Ministry of Women's Empowerment and all sorts of things. But this is the real Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I actually couldn't believe this was the spokeswoman, so I apologize.
Iran has ambition in the entire Middle East. They're posing a threat and are controlling and have destroyed Lebanon, controlling Lebanon through Hezbollah, destroying its politics, destroying its social fabric, destroying its economy. They did the same thing in Syria. They do the same thing in Iraq. They do the same thing in Yemen, destroying the population, destroying the country, bringing them on the verge of starvation. And this is what they're attempting to do in Jordan. That's what they're doing in Africa. That's what's happening. Who's arming al-Shabaab? Who's training al-Shabaab in Somalia right now? What's happening in Central and South America? Hezbollah is the biggest controller of illegal drug and weapon trafficking routes in Central and South America.
Wait, what?
Trump's war on the cartel is not just about the illegal drugs and weapon and the threat of those gangs, but it's the Iranian threat. And so Iran is a threat to the entire world. And Israel is at the front line of stopping the worst enemy the world can. And I don't understand that question.
With all respect, the question was not about Iran. The question was about
Israel's posing a threat on. Israel has never provoked, has never attacked unprovokedly.
Israel is never attacked unprovokedly is like my favorite quote of the year.
Usually these Israeli spokespeople are like native English speakers because they come from Australia or South Africa.
Yeah.
This lady seems to be a rare exception of someone who's not born actually, in a foreign country. So at least she's from Israel, it looks like. But yeah, that makes for funny lines like that. Israel.
Yeah, and she looks like she either just got out of the shower or is a big Rick James fan.
I mean,
she,
but yeah, but I just love. I mean, she has to acknowledge that all of Israel's wars. At least she has to kind of admit tacitly that it's not as if like the standard Israeli narrative is that Israel's always attacked, but actually she's actually saying that we've attacked, but we've attacked never unprovokedly. So we've always been provoked whenever we attacked, which of course is another lie. But at least she's kind of acknowledging at least that Israel has attacked every single time, because actually it does start all of its wars.
They didn't attack unprovokedly in 1967 when they were able to wipe out the much of the Egyptian Air Force because no one was ready for their attack. There was no pretext for it at all.
Yeah. And then they managed to steal all this land that they wanted, which somehow it's such a miracle in a defensive war, supposedly, that you end up stealing all this new territory that you've always wanted. What a miracle.
Unprovokedly.
This has always been on the defense of our country and our people. We have no ambition. When you hear the Ayatollah saying every single day about their ambitions, what about the Turkish ambitions? What about what's happening in Syria? Do you ask those leadership about it?
Well, hasn't Israel just stolen Mount Hermon, the highest point in Syria, and moved close to Damascus's suburbs, extending its occupation?
Well, Israel is.
And Israeli ministers have talked about going to Lebanon too. Sellers have talked about going to Lebanon. So they talk all the time about expanding their ambitions. I mean, they've been talking about that since before 1948. This is their entire history, is just stealing more land.
They have no ambition. They're just like, they're just wasting away in Margaritaville. They're not doing anything.
Well, Israel
this is great.
Is the key for stabilizing the Middle East.
That's almost as good as unprovokedly. Israel is the key for stabilizing the Middle East.
So if Iran abandons its nuclear program, Israel will do the same?
Israel is what's stabilizing the Middle East. Iran is what's
No answer.
destabilizing, arming, and terrorizing the entire population around. Do you know what we've been through? Not just the Israeli people, the Lebanese people, the Iranian people, the Yemenite people. The
Yemenite?
On for freedom,
is that their Israeli tribe?
For food,
yeah,
for economical prosperity. And who's preventing that? Iran. This is the greatest enemy the world have during these days. And so this arming Iran is not Israel's interest. It's your interest. It's international community's interest. Try and imagine what is happening right now in the Middle East with with nuclear weapons. It's not just a threat on Israel. It's a threat on the entire world.
Well, that's the Israeli logic, not exactly articulately expressed, but that's the logic. But it's also a way of deflecting from, I think, one of the most important issues that you're not allowed to, it's not even discussed in US media. And I think the US government is unofficially, it feels like they're unofficially banned from even discussing it because of the furor that would erupt, which is Israel's secret nuclear program, which is what is fueling Iran's enrichment program. I mean, it's the reason Iran has to enrich, along with Israeli pressure for an assault, an invasion, a regime change war. And she reminds me of when Donald Trump in the 2016 debate with Hillary was asked about, his boasting to Billy Bush about grabbing women by the genitals. It was like this leaked audio. And he said, we're going to knock the hell out of ISIS. And he just immediately deflected to knocking the hell out of ISIS. And then just the question, it just moved on and blunted the impact of that issue.
And what did Iran recently propose? They've revived again, which is something they put on the table for decades now, which is a nuclear-free Middle East. Let's have a nuclear-free Middle East. Whenever the UN talks about that, Iran supports it. It's only the US and Israel that refuse to even discuss it, when that would be the solution to everyone's problems. If you're so concerned about, nuclear proliferation, then just ban nuclear weapons in the Middle East. But the US and Israel won't do that because that would take away Israel's ability to threaten everybody with their nukes, which they actually have, unlike Iran, which, if you believe US intelligence, still does not have a nuclear weapons program. contrary to what many would argue would be in their own best interest. As John Mearsheimer argues, the Middle East would be safer if Iran had nuclear weapons.
India and Pakistan have nuclear weapons. That has probably reduced the risk of an India-Pakistan war over Kashmir. However, if a war does occur, it increases the risk of mass destruction. But I think if you look at Israel, the mentality of its citizens, embodied by the foreign ministry spokeswoman, who's clearly just off her rocker, very aggressive and warlike, the instability of Israeli politics. I think the greatest threat for a nuclear strike in the world right now emanates from Israel. And of course, there's no inspection. There's no inspection allowed at Dimona. I think every reporter who goes to the State Department who has any spine or brain at all has to do what Sam Husseini does and did. And, you know, if I decide to go back there, I have to do a bunch of paperwork. What I would just say is, does any country in the Middle East currently have nuclear weapons? I remember Helen Thomas used to ask that question. And you'll see that currently the spokeswoman will not have an answer and refuse to answer. She called Tammy Bruce, she called Sam Husseini a conspiracy theorist for daring to bring up Israeli nuclear weapons. But you're doing it so the American public can see that there's something deeply wrong there. There's a major contradiction in our policy, and that only Israel has been granted this exemption, I guess because of the Holocaust. And it's the one key to, I think, ending this crisis. You know, if I were campaigning for office, I would campaign as for a nuclear-free Middle East. But I'm not going to campaign for office somehow it wouldn't the bullet wouldn't just hit my ear.
You know, one thing I want to say is that I know the idea of a Palestinian state is not very popular among leftist circles, because it would mean accepting the existence of this apartheid colony that stole their land. But on that issue, Iran has a far more accommodating position than Israel or the US does. Iran has said before that they would accept a Palestinian state, especially if Palestinians approved of it in a popular referendum. So it's only Israel and the US that stand apart and insisting on Israel's right to take over all the Palestinian and a wider regional land that it wants. And it's Iran that supported the compromise that the rest of the world supports. So, and I think, one of the reasons why Israel wants regime change in Iran is it doesn't want to have any possible actor in the region that can help impose the consensus that it's been trying to undermine. It wants the right to basically crush Palestinian self-determination. And because Iran has supported resistance factions like Hamas, that's why it has to go, because it stands in the way of Israel being able to steal as much land as it wants. And Yoav Gallant, the Israeli defense minister, he recently gave an interview where he acknowledged that Hamas's demands are simply that they wanted Israel, on top of releasing political prisoners, to withdraw from the occupied territories, including the West Bank. And therefore, Hamas, along with Israeli captives inside Gaza, had to be destroyed. This is Yoav Gallant.
I'm fighting Hamas since it was established in 1987, and I know them quite good. And I knew that they will not give you anything unless you have something that they really need. And this is not the prisoners. The prisoners in Israel...
Meaning the Palestinian prisoners in Israeli prisons.
The Palestinian prisoners in Israeli prisons was already given. They were speaking about Israel withdrawing from Judah and Samaria. They were speaking about how to divide Jerusalem in their thinking. So
Judea and Samaria, that means the West Bank. So Hamas was speaking about Israel withdrawing from Judea and Samaria, which is Israel's term for its settler colonies in the West Bank, and also how to divide Jerusalem, which is giving East Jerusalem to Palestinians, which again, that's supposed to be the compromise that most of the world supports and the U.S. once claimed to support. But Israel won't even accept a Palestinian compromise because they want to hold on to that land in the occupied West Bank. And so Yoav Golan saying there that that's what Hamas's motive was in launching October 7th. It wasn't just getting prisoners, political prisoners freed. It was also getting Israel to end its occupation. Israel won't do that. So therefore, we have to be in this perpetual war with everybody.
Well, it's also ascribing logical motives to what Hamas did when we were told it was just about sheer savagery, killing Jews and strangling babies.
Yeah.
Now they tell us. There's a major spread in the Financial Times from last weekend, I believe, about Netanyahu's next move. An emboldened Netanyahu makes its next move. And Ami Ayalon, who is the former director of the Shin Bet, says that by late spring 2024, the war on Gaza had achieved all military objectives possible. There's nothing else it could achieve, and that everything that has happened since then has been purely political. In other words, all the slaughter that we're continuing to witness is political because Netanyahu will lose his coalition, may go to prison for corruption trials, and needs to keep the war going for as long as possible. And now the Trump administration, following the lead of Tony Blinken and Biden, are assisting. But Ayalon, in his assessment, said Biden was a Zionist. Biden actually had ideological motives. Trump does not. And Trump is being purely opportunistic there, which is interesting. It's just transactional politics. You have going back to the lobby documentary, the hidden camera documentary that Al Jazeera refused to publish. Adam Milstein, some of his staffers at Israel lobby groups like the Israel Project and elsewhere declared that they would get on the phone with Trump and his people, and Trump would say, "Send me more money. I need more money from Adam Milstein. What do you want me to do?" And it was just like that. It's all on camera. So there's an Israeli investigative report that emerged this week. I don't have the photo in front of me. There's no real point. Netanyahu deployed a photo of what he said was a tunnel in the Philadelphia corridor between Egypt and Gaza after achieving all military objectives in Gaza that they thought they needed to achieve by the spring. In order to keep Israel bogged down there, he said, we need to occupy the Philadelphia corridor. And here's a giant tunnel that we've just discovered that a Jeep can drive through. It turned out the Israeli military had built a trench around the Jeep out of dirt that resembled a tunnel, and there was no tunnel. It was completely imaginary, and it was front and center in Netanyahu's presentation, along with phony leaks disseminated through the German tabloid Bild and I believe Jewish Insider here in Washington from Netanyahu's team, claiming that Yahya Sinwar had a plan to escape into Egypt along with several hostages unless Israel occupied the Philadelphia corridor. And now they're demanding to occupy the Philadelphia corridor again. They're still doing it. It's still happening now, and so many people are being slaughtered. West Gaza is being heavily bombarded as we speak. I mean, just go follow any Twitter account from Gaza City, and you will see the torment that they're going through for this political war.